Hi everyone, my name is Mrs. James and I'm the manager of the Special Collections Department at the Main Library downtown. This presentation is to prepare you for your visits to Stan Hywet Hall and Gardens in just a few days, which I know you're very excited about. And my job is to help you understand the different kinds of sources that are used in historical research, specifically what we call primary and secondary sources, some of which you will see when you visit Stan Hywet. So what is a primary source? Well, we all know that the word primary means first. So primary sources are original records from the past recorded by people who were either involved in the event or witnessed the event. They were there and experienced it firsthand. And primary sources can take many different forms. They can be documents or objects. Sometimes you'll hear objects referred to as artifacts. They can also be visual evidence, such as photographs or drawings. And primary sources are important because they can really give you an idea about what people who were alive at the time of the event thought about it. Keep in mind, however, that a primary source only reflects one person's point of view, and it can include their bias or their prejudice. We all have our opinions, right? These are examples of some of the types of primary sources that you might encounter when you go to Stan Hywet. Government records, diaries, newspaper articles written at the time an event occurred, letters, speeches, interviews, and photographs. And I'm going to show you examples of some of these types of primary sources in just a few moments. Census records are an important and useful primary source for historians. These are government records, and they can provide a lot of information about people and their families over a period of years. So what is a census record? Well, census means to count, and every 10 years since 1790, our United States government has been counting us. They not only count us, however, they also record information about us, detailed information. And for many years, for decades, it was taken by census takers who walked door to door. So this information was collected firsthand, which makes it a primary source. We're going to follow along one of Stan Hywet's young staff members by using the census and some other primary source records. His name is Trygve Lansdorp, and he immigrated from Sweden. Here's an example of an original census record. Remember, the census takers went door to door, so they are handwritten. And this 1920 record shows Mr. and Mrs. Seiberling, who of course were the owners of Stan Hywet. Their 3 children and 11 servants. However, at Stan Hywet, they will not refer to them as servants. They call them household staff. And Trygve, as you'll notice, is not listed because he did not arrive until 1924. However, if you look in the columns on the right-hand side, you'll see the names of countries: Germany, Switzerland, France, Scotland, Ireland, Austria. These are the countries that the servants reported where they were from. So as you can see, in 1920, all of these household staff of Stan Hywet were immigrants. Here's the 1930 census, and this is the first time we see Trygve. You'll also see that Mr. and Mrs. Seiberling are still living at Stan Hywet, but only one child is still living with them because the other 2 kids have grown up and moved out of the house. We also see that they only have 6 servants instead of 11, which is the number that they had in 1920. And this is probably because of the Great Depression. It was a time of economic hardship when even wealthier people didn't have as much money to spend. So again, this is where we first see Trygve. Now, if your teacher made copies of the 1930 census record, you can follow along with that, starting at row number 33, or you can follow along with this slide. So this is the information recorded for Trygve in the 1930 census. We see his name. His relation to the head of the household is employee. It's kind of hard to read. Sex, M for male. Race, W for white. Age, 26 years old. Married or single? He was single. In school, he reported no. Could he read and write? He said yes. And then place of birth. He reported that he was born in Sweden, his father was born in Sweden, his mother was born in Sweden, and he spoke Swedish. Then below that, we see a year of immigration. He reported that he came in 1924. And next to that, you'll see the initials PA, and that means papers. So in 1930, when this census was taken, he reported that he had started the process of becoming a citizen. So he had submitted his paperwork. Sometimes you'll see AL, and that stands for alien. That means they were not a citizen. If you see NA, it means naturalized, which means they were a citizen. Naturalization is just another word for citizenship. He reported that he could speak English and that he was a manager for a private home. Here's another primary source I found for Trigve, and this is his naturalization record. So this is the paperwork that the first paperwork he submitted here in Summit County, declaring his intention to become a citizen of the United States. And these records provide a great deal of personal information. We see his name. He said he was a butler. He had a fair complexion. He was 5 feet 8.5 inches tall. He weighed 120 pounds. His hair was light. His color of eyes were blue-gray. The name of the town where he was born. He reported that he worked at Stan Hywet Hall. Even the name of the ship that he came on. So this is a lot of information, a lot of detailed information. Do you feel like you know Trigve a little bit better? And of course, this is a primary source because Trigve himself provided this information about himself to the court. Here's another primary source. In this case, it's a government record that recorded passengers on a ship. And this is a passenger list, but sometimes it's called a manifest. And this record tells us that he left Sweden on August 2nd, 1924, that he was a student, his hometown was Gothenburg, the name of the ship was the Stockholm, and his final destination was Bay Village, Ohio, which is west of Cleveland. It even notes his mother's name. We don't know why he left Sweden, but like many immigrants, he might have come to Ohio to join other family members or simply to start a new life. And again, you might see that word alien, and that simply means that the people on this ship were not United States citizens. There's lots of information on this record, and one of the things I want to encourage you to do when you go to Stan Hywet, look at the details, pay really close attention to the things that you see, because sometimes it's the tiniest piece of information that can give you the best clues. So after the late 1930s, I lost track of Trigve. He no longer appears in our city directories, but by doing a little extra digging around, I found him living in Connecticut, where he was working for another wealthy man in a large manor home, not unlike Stan Hywet. And this is a listing for from a 1939 city directory for a city in Connecticut. And city directories were compiled in a similar way to the census. People went door to door and collected information. So city directories can be considered to be a primary source. Again, we don't really know why he left Stan Hywet, but we know that by 1939, he's living in Connecticut. And this is his passenger arrival record in 1952. So at some point he went back to Sweden, which was not uncommon. Immigrants often did this, after they'd been here for a while and they'd saved some money. They often went back home to visit family members. So we know that in October of 1952, he came back from Sweden to New York. This is the last primary source I find for Trigve, and this is his death record, Social Security Death Index. This tells us he died in March of 1982, and he was 79 years old, and he died in Queens, New York. So we know he went from Sweden to Bay Village, Ohio, to Akron, to Connecticut, to New York. Photographs are another useful primary source. Have you ever heard the expression, every picture tells a story, or pictures don't tell a lie? Well, that is the case with a photograph. Photographs capture a moment in time, so they are most definitely a primary source. We have a lot of historic photographs in the library, and many of them are available for you to see on our Summit Memory page, which we like to describe as our scrapbook, our digital scrapbook of Summit County history. And included in Summit Memory are some photographs from Stan Hywet's collection. Here's a photograph of some kids swimming in the lagoon near the Stan Hywet house. They might have been Stan Hywet children, we're not sure, but this photograph certainly does capture a moment in time, doesn't it? It's a primary source. Here's some other examples of photographs. In 1913, there was a devastating flood in Ohio that caused a great deal of damage, and Akron lost a lot of buildings and houses, and many people became homeless. I think these pictures tell a story too, don't they? Newspapers are a very important primary source. This is the front page of our Akron Beacon Journal on the day after the flood, and it includes eyewitness and first-hand accounts of what happened. So the reporters who wrote these articles saw the damage and witnessed the devastation and probably talked to people who lost their homes and who were affected. So yes, this is a primary source. Diaries can be an important primary source, especially for learning more about the everyday lives of people. And although this example of a diary written by a young girl from Richfield, Ohio in 1877 she wasn't an immigrant, it does capture her life and what she was thinking and what her life was like in that time period. And very interesting that this diary is currently being shared on a regular basis on a Facebook page. So certainly an example of how the past and the present can come together. And primary sources can sometimes be three-dimensional. They can be an object or what museum people like to call artifacts. And this is Mr. Seiberling's special shower that he had designed just for him. It has high pressure and lots of holes so it would spray from all angles, probably a great way to wake up in the morning. And good health was very important to Mr. Seiberling, and this was part of his healthy living habits. And even though there are no words or pictures associated with this particular item, it still tells a story. It still tells us a little something about Mr. Seiberling. Now I'm going to explain what secondary sources are and also show you some examples. Secondary, like the word, means second or later. So secondary sources are made at a later date and include written information by historians or others after an event has taken place. Books are an important secondary resource, and here are some examples of books that were published in the last 10 to 15 years. And although the subject of these books took place a long time ago, they're not primary sources because they were written later. And although the authors used primary sources for their research and might have even included some examples in the books themselves are considered to be secondary sources. Other examples of secondary sources would be your textbooks or encyclopedias. This is another example of a secondary source. Although the event written about for this newsletter took place more than 100 years ago, it was written by one of my staff members, and although she used primary sources like photographs and newspaper articles published at the time for her research, it is a secondary source because she wasn't there and she did not experience it firsthand. So to review, primary sources are original records created at the time of an event by people or organizations who were involved in the event or witnessed the event. Secondary sources are created at a later date and include information created by historians or others after an event has taken place. So this concludes our primary and secondary sources lesson. I hope this will help you to understand some of the interesting documents and other items you'll see at Stan Hywet in a few days, and I hope you enjoy learning more about the immigrant experience when you visit Stan Hywet. If you're interested in learning more, I just wanted to point out to you that we do have on our website a page devoted specifically for teachers and students. So check that out if you're interested in learning more about what the library has to offer. And I thank you very much and have a great time at Stan Hywet.